Shavuot is the holiday of our acceptance of the Torah with love. Rabbi Moshe Prisco, in his Sefer Yadav Shel Moshe, says that the date on which we celebrate the giving of the Torah, the 50th day of the Omer, is actually the day on which the Jewish people wholeheartedly declared, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. It's the day on which we showed our immense enthusiasm and appreciation and excitement for the Torah. It's the day when we accepted the Torah with love. Our acceptance of the Torah with so much love is why we stay up all night learning, even though doing so makes really no sense. Perhaps leads to sleepier learning and sleepier davening, but we're just so excited we can't sleep. It's why we read Akdamos, this strange Aramaic poem in the middle of laning, because it expresses the love affair between the Jewish people and the Torah. It's the reason why we read Megillat Ruth, the story of a woman who so fell in love with Torah that she left her whole life behind and followed Naomi to Israel to an unknown life. It's the reason why the Jews in Lod last week ran into their burning shuls to save the Torahs that they walked out with, holding them, standing tall and proud, just as the Jews did in Germany 80 plus years ago. It's the reason Sifrei Torah have been written or delivered to almost every corner of the earth. It's a tree of life for all who hold it. It's our life force. It's the source of our growth, and we not only love it, we cannot live without it. Every year we pause to reflect upon the moment of Har Sinai and every moment of Jewish history subsequent to then, when we re-accepted the Torah with so much love. We pause to reflect upon those moments of Jewish history and make the conscious decision to re-accept the Torah with love ourselves, just as they did before us. There's a story told in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah about the immense love of Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion for the Torah. Rabbi Hanina lived in the 2nd century during the period of the Hadrianic persecution of the Jews, still living in Israel in the post-Churban era, when the study of Torah was forbidden by rabbinic edict. The Gemara tells us, Mitzauhu l'Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion shaya yoshev ve'osek b'Torah umakil kihilos b'rabim v'sefer Torah munach lo b'cheiko. In the time of the persecution, they found Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion, who was sitting and dealing with Torah, learning Torah. Makil kihilos b'rabim, he gathered many people to study with him. And Sefer Torah munach lo b'cheiko, his Torah was on his heart and was carried with him every single day wherever he went. What a beautiful image. One could say that maybe he was being reckless. One could say maybe he was being crazy. One could say he was wrong to risk his life. And it's actually, in the end of the day, not really our place to judge at all. But what is abundantly clear is that he had this unbounded love for Torah. No matter what, he couldn't give it up. No matter what, he couldn't live without it. Life without Torah for him was not a life worth living. Kind of the way that Rabbi Akiva says that a Jew without Torah is like a fish without water. Despite the threats of the Romans, Rabbi Hanina had no choice but to learn it, to teach it, to literally and metaphorically carry it in his chest, close to his heart everywhere he went. Unfortunately, the Romans caught up with him and tortured him, and he became forever known as one of the 10 martyrs, the Asara Haruge Malchus, that we speak about on Yom Kippur and on Tisha B'Av. The Gemara describes the horrific scene of his death. Heviuhu ukrachuhu b'sefer Torah. They brought him and they wrapped his body in the parchment of a Sefer Torah. V'hikifuha bechevlei zemoros v'tzisu b'hen ha'or. They covered him with branches and they lit him on fire. V'heviu svugin shel tsemer u'shraum b'mayim v'hinichu malibo kedei shelo tetzei nishmaso meheira. They brought tufts of wool and they soaked them in the water and they put them around his heart so that he would be slower to burn and be tortured more. Terrible scene. In that absolutely awful moment, the students of Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion asked him a strange question, to which he gave a beautiful answer. Amru lo Talmidav, his students said to him, Rebbe, ma ta roeh? What do you see? Amar lahem, he says to them, Gvilin nisrafim ve'osios porchos. I see the parchment burning, but I see the letters flying. They're flying up to the heavens. This is an often quoted exchange, and even on a visceral level, one realizes there is so much beauty to this image and this story. But what exactly did the students mean when they asked what he saw? And what exactly did he mean when he said that the letters were soaring up on high? Tosfos gives a very literal approach to this Gemara. Tosfos seemed to explain that somehow Rabbi Hanina must have been hidden from the sight of the students. They couldn't see him. Maybe he was behind a wall or a barrier or in the jail of the Romans somehow. They could sense something was happening in there. They could hear the crackling of the fire, but since they couldn't see what was happening, they asked Rabbi Hanina a simple, physical, basic question. What do you see, Rabbi? What's in front of your eyes? What's going on back there? And he answered that the letters of the Torah, the sparks, were flying everywhere from the parchment being burned. Most authorities, however, have taken a more homiletic approach to this beautiful interchange, imagining that Rabbi Hanina's words were more symbolic than concrete. The great contemporary postic of our time, of our generation, Rav Asher Weiss, explains the question of the students as follows. He says, Efshar de she'elas hatalmidim, lo al re'iyas eine basar bilvad haita, ela af al re'iyas eine hasechel vehalev. It is possible that the question of the students, he says, was not really about what Rabbi Hanina physically saw in front of him. When they say, Rebbe, what do you see? They don't mean what he saw with his eyes, but more about what figuratively he saw. What did he see in their future? The hayamim hayu yemei evra v'zam, yemei tzia v'tzalma v'shel gzeros kashos v'avadon. These were difficult, horrible days of terrible tragedy and loss and suffering. One day was worse than the one before. And the greatest of rabbis, the one who we learn from, who we live from. Ola Basara Shamayma, he's being tortured and taken to the heavens in the most brutal of ways. Vizakas Hashe'ela of the Hayeush Baka mitoch liba mashavur. Their cry of despair and of anguish came from the depths of their heart, and they say, Rebbe, ma taroeh. Rebbe, what do you see? Hayesh tikva la'achrisenu? Is there a hope for our future? Is there a future for us in this world? Halo katson b'li ro'eh, nisharim anu. We're like a flock without a shepherd. These students were sunk deep in their suffering, were filled with doubt and uncertainty. They had no more Beis HaMikdash. They lived under harsh rulers. They saw martyrdom left, right, and center. They saw so many Jews go off into exile. Perhaps they even saw the failure of the Bar Kokhba rebellion. And now, last but certainly not least, they were losing their Rebbe, their teacher, their guide, their mentor, their shepherd, in the most brutal of ways. They were afraid. They were asking the saged man in his last moments of life, Hayesh tikva la'achrisenu. Is there hope for us? What will become of us? What will be our lot? How will we manage? Rebbe, ma taroeh, our master, what do you see in our future? He answered them, and he said, according to Rav Asher Weiss, Al yipol ruchachem, don't be despaired. Al yirach levavchem, don't lose heart. Yesh tikva la'achrisech, there is hope for your future. Yesh schar lepulasech, there is a reward for all your efforts. Yes, Kvilin Yisrafin. Malchus HaRasha Yechol Lisrof V'Lichlos Eskufeinu. They can burn us. All of our enemies can take us down in many ways. Ach Nishmas HaUma Yisraelis Eina Bas Kilyon. But the soul of the Jewish people can never be destroyed. Osios Parchos. The letters representing our soul are flying away. The body they can burn, but the soul they cannot touch. Kasher yale ratzon lefanav yisparach shemo yachzuru haosios v'yikbu b'mekomam. When God wants, He'll grab those letters that are soaring in the air and plant them back in their place. V'shuv yakilu kilos barabim. And again, Jews will learn Torah in great mass. Shekvar yiftiach Kadosh Baruch Hu lo tishakach mipi zaro, because God promised us the Torah would never be lost. Where Rabbi Hanina answered was Dvila Nisrafim. I do see fire. I do see challenge. I do see the destruction of Torah in this time. But I also see Osios Porchos. I also see that there's a part of Torah that our enemies can never burn and never take away and never destroy. As much as the parchment is burning, the letters, they're evading the fire. They're not being brought down. They're soaring. The letters are flying around and ready for Hashem to send them back to establish their place on earth at the right time within the hearts of people like you who love this Torah and would do anything to keep it. Our Torah is alive and it is strong, he says to them. You're alive and you're strong. Yesh tikva la'achrisech. There's hope, there's a future, and I can see it now as clear as day. Rav Asher Weiss goes one step further in interpreting this conversation and interpreting the response of Rabbi Chanina ben Tiradion of Osios Porchos. He says, Nira od, Diksha Hatana Hagadol Rabbi Chanina ben Tiradion Osios Porchos. I can say one more idea, he says, about the letters that were flying. Kavana kfula haita lo. He says there's a double entendre to the phrase Osios Porchos, that the letters are flying. He says that although the simple meaning of Osios Porchos is that letters were flying, Pei Reish Chet is also the root of the word poreach, to flower, to sprout, to blossom. What Rabbi Chanina was conveying to his students was that the letters of my Torah that are now being torn away from the parchment by the fire, the teachings of my life that are now going up to the heavens as my body here on earth is taken from me in the fire, will one day blossom again. My teachings and my Torah will be firmly planted in you and you and you and you, my students, and will grow and will flourish and will blossom and be poreach and give rise to new fruits of life in the great edifice of Torah, which is eternal. As he was dying, Rabbi Chanina was able to leave the world with one measure of nechama, of comfort, knowing his Torah would not vanish, but that it would have a future and continue to flower and give forth new life. We are that future. Our continued learning of the Torah and Rabbi Chanina's Torah, quoted on so many pages of the Talmud, and his letters, 2,000 years later, the fact that we learn them is proof that he was so wise and that he was so right. What an amazingly exquisite and hopeful message and image. Here was a man who lost it all and was able to so clearly see the eternity of Torah and the Jewish people. He was a man who lost it all and whose love for Torah was not diminished one iota. That's the kind of history of love for Torah that we celebrate on Shavuot. That is the kind of history of love for Torah that can raise us and inspire us to discover our love story with the Torah as well. A love story that will help us to work hard and to learn better and to teach better and to sprout our own letters that will continue to blossom in the unbroken chain of love for Torah that goes back to this day on Har Sinai thousands of years ago. The image of Rabbi Chanina and his Sefer Torah strikes me as a powerful one for us as we think about Yizkor today. Death is a moment of such finality, of such challenging fragility, of such a stark ending. It's a moment that confounds even those who live the best and longest of lives. As a person leaves the world, they cannot help but become preoccupied with the very question that preoccupied the students surrounding Rabbi Chanina. People leaving this world wonder, have I accomplished anything in my life? What will be my future and my legacy? As I ascend to the heavens and am no longer, what will be of all I did, of all the letters of my scroll that I worked on all my life? Will they have a future? Will they outlast me? Will they make an impact? Will they bear fruit? One of the most comforting answers for them can be Gvila Nisrafim ve'Osios Porchos. Gvila Nisrafim, yes, you're leaving us, but Osios Porchos, your letters, your deeds, your contributions were not for naught. Your life and all you did, all you taught, all you touched, all you wrote, all you said will evade the finality of this moment and not only fly, but be poreach. They will give rise and blossom into new life and new letters even after you are gone. On this day of Yizkor, we absolutely pause to remember our loved ones. But on this day of Yizkor, we also pause to give nechama, comfort, to each of their souls that ascended to the heavens by telling them there's a hemshech, there's a future that is growing and sprouting from the letters that you left behind. Whether those are big contributions or small, whether we had you in our lives for a long time or a short time or never met you at all, we know that the letters you left behind continue to find their place here in our world, and for that we are forever grateful. We'll now move to recite Yizkor in memory of all of our loved ones. But we'll begin with our communal Yizkor prayers for the martyrs of the Holocaust, the soldiers of the IDF, and soldiers who fought in all other battles as well. I'll bring up the text of the Yizkor on my screen so you can all see it as I recite it.